When Natalie Rivera boarded a plane to Saudi Arabia, all she wanted was a reset, one final act of bravery after a life full of betrayals. But 21 days later, she emerged from a villa compound with sunburned skin, trembling hands, and a silence that terrified everyone who heard it. She didn't say where she'd been, or who she'd been with. But the last thing she whispered before boarding her flight home was, "I left someone behind." Who, and why? The heat hit Natalie like a silent slap, not aggressive, but suffocating in its certainty. Riyadh shimmered in a pale golden haze as she stepped out of the airport, her phone buzzing with notifications. Safe flight. Send pics. Live your best life, Nat. She smiled at the messages, even replied to one with a sun emoji. But her eyes didn't match the enthusiasm. This wasn't a vacation. This was an exorcism. 2 years ago, she'd been fired from her nursing job after exposing a fatal error covered up by hospital execs. Since then, life in Seattle had crumbled, marriage, career, even her dog, lost to cancer. So when she saw a glossy ad for the Desert Reclaims You solo retreat hosted in a luxurious Riyadh suburb, something inside her clicked. Not curiosity. Not joy. Just the desperate need to feel like she still mattered. At baggage claim, a woman in a flowing abaya greeted her with a practiced smile and a small sign that read N. Rivera. Her name, printed neatly. Her presence, expected. The woman introduced herself as Saida, her hospitality coordinator. Natalie noted how perfect her English was, not accented, just sculpted, like someone who'd spent years learning not just grammar but tone. They passed security easily, the air-conditioned SUV waiting outside whispering wealth. Saida spoke about the upcoming itinerary, guided souk tours, camel rides at dawn, cultural workshops in the city, and meditative nights under the stars. It sounded blissful. It sounded fake. But Natalie nodded politely, peering out the tinted window as skyscrapers blurred into sandstone villas and the city peeled away behind them like a mirage. Her hotel was called the Alma Retreat, a modern, minimalist sanctuary nestled behind high stone walls. There were no other guests in sight, but the lobby was lit, scented with oud and citrus. A young man in uniform took her suitcase silently, and Saida handed Natalie a sleek, glass tablet with her itinerary, pre-scheduled, color-coded, and overly curated. "You'll love your wellness mentor," she said with a wink. Natalie offered a polite smile, but her instincts twitched. This place was too smooth. Too orchestrated. That night, she wandered the rooftop garden alone. The moon looked unusually low, casting sharp shadows. She posted a picture on her Instagram story, a shadowy door below, captioned, "New chapter." The next day passed without incident. She attended a cooking class taught by a woman named Layla who barely spoke but watched Natalie like she was memorizing her. Later, at dinner, Saida joined her unannounced and insisted she try a date milkshake that changes lives. Natalie obliged, despite feeling a prickly unease she couldn't place. The milkshake was oddly sweet. After dessert, Saida invited her for tea at a private residence just 10 minutes away, a place where the real stories of this land are told, she said. Natalie hesitated but agreed. They drove through winding streets into a quiet suburb lined with marble homes and palms. The villa was elegant, with mosaic lanterns lining the entrance and a golden door at the end of a long, tiled hallway. Inside, something shifted. The air grew cooler. The light harsher. Saida's voice became distant. As Natalie finished her tea, her head swam. Her eyes blurred. "Must be the jet lag," she mumbled. Saida smiled gently and guided her to a guest room just for a short rest. The last thing Natalie remembered was the soft thud of the door closing behind her and the unmistakable click of a lock. When she woke, the sun was gone. So was her phone. The golden door. Gone too. It had been replaced by 4 blank walls, 1 barred window, and a small tray of food. Her bag was inside the room, but her passport wasn't. For the first time in years, Natalie screamed. No one came. Natalie Rivera had always been the kind of woman who ran toward the fire instead of away from it. In her old life, that instinct made her a brilliant ICU nurse, calm under pressure, sharp with diagnosis, relentless when it came to saving someone teetering on the edge. But it also meant she never walked away when she should have. The trouble started at St. James Medical Center, 2 years before Riyadh. A routine surgery had gone wrong, and Natalie discovered that the patient, a teenage boy, had died not from complications, but from a dosage error made by a surgeon too proud to admit it. She filed a report. Then another. When no one responded, she bypassed protocol and sent her findings to the state board. The hospital retaliated by labeling her unstable, accusing her of violating privacy laws. She was suspended first, then let go. Friends vanished. Colleagues stopped returning her calls. Her reputation collapsed like wet plaster. By the time the legal battle fizzled out, she'd sold her condo and moved into a tiny rental apartment. The boy's family never knew her name. Her marriage hadn't stood a chance. Her husband, Derek, had tried to be supportive at first, but as months dragged on and Natalie's stubborn obsession with justice refused to soften, he grew distant. Eventually, he accused her of ruining their future for a stranger's mistake. They divorced quietly. No drama. Just a signature on a paper and a pair of house keys slid across the table. Natalie packed up her life into 4 boxes and stored them in a friend's garage. She couldn't afford therapy, but she tried meditation. She took long walks. She wrote letters to herself. They always started the same, "You were right to speak up." But they always ended the same, too. Then why does it feel like you're the one who needs saving? She heard about the desert retreat from a travel influencer's post. A sleek video showing a blonde woman sipping tea while falcons circled the horizon. Find yourself where silence meets the sun. It was corny, but something about the stillness, the promise of distance, made Natalie curious. She researched the company, real website, glowing reviews, photographs of smiling guests next to bonfires. It looked safe. And she didn't want adventure, she wanted escape. She cashed in her retirement savings, what was left of it, and booked the trip for mid-April. She didn't tell anyone. No one would have noticed. Her social life had become a carousel of polite rejections and solo dinners. The week before her flight, she visited her mother's grave, not because she believed in signs, but because she needed to speak aloud and not be interrupted. "I'm going far," she whispered to the stone. "Somewhere I can't be found." She remembered how her mother used to say, "If the world gets too loud, go where it can't follow." Natalie smiled bitterly. She hoped Riyadh was far enough. On the plane, she avoided eye contact, refused alcohol, and read a tattered paperback she found in the airport lounge. Her only luggage was a compact suitcase and a bag filled with journals, essential oils, and one framed photo, her and a young girl named Maddie, a patient she'd once treated after a car crash. Maddie had lived. Maddie had called Natalie the lady with the iron hands. Natalie clung to that nickname like armor. What Natalie never expected was how easily she disappeared. There were no flags at customs, no questions from hotel staff. No one asked why a woman was traveling alone, and she mistook that as progress. But in truth, she'd already become a file in someone's drawer, a target labeled ideal, female, single, unanchored. The smile Saida wore at the airport wasn't welcoming. It was predatory. And Natalie, brave, broken Natalie, had walked right into the trap thinking it was a door. In those first 2 days before the door locked behind her, she felt herself loosening. She walked barefoot on mosaic floors. She inhaled cardamom from silver kettles. She began journaling again. "Maybe," she wrote, "this place really can scrub me clean." But beneath her efforts to embrace peace, the old voice still murmured. The one that questioned everything. The one that made her look over her shoulder even when she was alone. She couldn't silence it, and now she understood why. That voice wasn't fear. It was memory, the kind that knew how quickly institutions could lie, how fast safety could be rewritten by people in power, how easily someone could vanish if no one was watching. It was the voice that had saved her patience. The voice that cost her everything. And now, locked in a strange room with no way to contact the outside world, that voice returned. Louder. Sharper. "You were right to speak up," it repeated. But now it added a question: will you survive it this time? The room had no clock, no mirror, no sense of time. The only window was too high to see out of, barred with vertical steel rods so closely spaced she couldn't fit her forearm through. The first hour passed in disbelief. Natalie paced the small space, her thoughts racing between explanations. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe they were worried she was sick. Maybe someone had stolen something and security needed to check. The tray of food, rice, flatbread, a hard-boiled egg, sat untouched on the table. Her bag was there, but rifled through. The framed photo of Maddie was gone. That was the first thing that made her cry. She didn't scream again. That seemed pointless now. She tapped the walls, pressed her ear against the door, called out in English, then Arabic, then silence. Her voice sounded small in the pale emptiness. That first night, if it could be called that, she didn't sleep. A light in the ceiling never turned off. It glowed with a fluorescent hum that blurred thoughts and gave everything a feverish edge. At some point, a soft knock came at the door, not hurried, not threatening, just final. A slot opened, and another tray appeared. Still no phone. No answers. Just different food. On the third day, or maybe the fourth, time folded in on itself, the door opened for the first time. Two women stood there, veiled, silent. They gestured for her to follow. She tried to ask questions, but they only nodded as if rehearsed. They led her down a narrow hallway lined with polished stone and low lights. Every few feet, there were cameras embedded into the ceiling, small blinking red dots watching everything. Natalie's mind sharpened. This wasn't hospitality. This was surveillance. They brought her into a bathroom. Clean. White. Sterile. One woman handed her folded clothes, modest, light brown, no labels. The other gestured toward the shower. Natalie hesitated. The women didn't leave. They stood outside, facing the wall, waiting. She showered, eyes darting to every corner, every vent. No cameras that she could see, but she no longer trusted what she could see. When she returned to the room, it had changed. The walls were now painted a muted yellow. A potted plant had appeared near the window. The tray of food now included a small cup of strong coffee. She knew what it was: conditioning. Gradual comfort. Induced compliance. She'd read about it in trauma recovery literature. The captor becomes the caregiver. On what she guessed was the sixth day, the door opened again, this time for someone new. A tall man, clean-shaven, with the casual arrogance of someone used to control. He wore no uniform, just an expensive watch and perfect posture. He introduced himself in perfect English as Majid. "You've been ill," he said smoothly. "But you are safe now. There's been a misunderstanding. Please rest. Your safety is our priority." Natalie asked about her passport, her phone. Majid didn't answer. Instead, he smiled and told her stories about the desert. How silence was a gift in his country, how Westerners often misinterpret kindness as control. He said she was being protected until things were clarified. When she asked what needed clarification, he changed the subject. After that, Majid became a regular presence. Sometimes he brought her news clippings, stories about rising tension between American tourists and local authorities. Other times, he brought books in English, all about Middle Eastern culture and religion. "Understanding breeds peace," he said. But Natalie noticed something chilling in his eyes, a calculation, a coldness beneath the charm. Once, she mentioned calling the U.S. Embassy. His smile didn't break, but he replied, "You're not where they think you are." That night, the light in her room dimmed for the first time. She took that as a threat, not a mercy. The routines became stricter. Lights on at a certain hour. A knock signaling time to eat. No mirrors, still. No metal objects. She began hiding pieces of food in napkins, creating tiny markers for the passage of time. She scratched a calendar onto the wooden underside of her bed frame using a bent piece of cutlery she stole from a tray. The only contact she had with the outside world was a TV they brought in once, showing pre-approved programming in Arabic, mostly religious sermons and state news. One morning, they allowed her to sit in a garden courtyard, but only under the watch of a silent woman who never blinked. On day 10, she was sure now, thanks to her makeshift calendar, she was taken to a larger room with 3 other women. They didn't speak, just looked at her, then at the cameras. One woman mouthed the word Canada. Another pointed subtly at the ceiling, then tapped her wrist. Natalie realized then, she wasn't the only one. Whatever this place was, it was practiced. Engineered. She wasn't sick. She wasn't under suspicion. She had been collected. Her final night before everything shifted, Majid visited again. This time, he brought perfume. A gift, he said, to remind you of your time here. She didn't touch it. He left it on the table and whispered, obedience is not defeat. Sometimes, it's survival. She stared at him without blinking. Then I'll survive without obeying. His smile faded. He left without a word. The next morning, the plant was gone. The yellow walls repainted white. The coffee, replaced with water. And under the tray, a note had been tucked inside a napkin. Just 2 words. Don't trust. Days began bleeding into each other with cruel repetition, but Natalie had developed a rhythm, not of comfort, but of resistance. She memorized the shift patterns of the guards by the shadows under the door. She learned to feign sleep just long enough to overhear the late-night murmurs in the hallway. She marked time by the sounds, a metal tray's arrival, the electric hum of the ceiling light changing intensity, the mechanical buzz of a lock disengaging. But it was the whispers that changed everything. They began faintly, barely audible through the air vents in the far corner of her room. At first, she thought she was imagining it, the effects of captivity, or her mind straining for human contact. But one night, as she lay still with a blanket pressed against the vent to soften the echo, she heard a word spoken in a rushed, accented whisper, American. Her body froze. She whispered back, yes. There was silence. Then, name. Natalie hesitated. Natalie. A pause. Then the reply, Sarah. Canada. 16 days. The voice was young, but tired. Over the next few nights, more voices joined, distant, cautious, encoded in fear. There was Amina, from France. Lila, from India. A Ukrainian girl named Katia, only 19. Each woman had a similar story, invited or lured to the country under false pretenses, isolated, watched, then contained. Some had been moved from place to place. Others, like Natalie, were held in furnished rooms under the illusion of care. But there was no illusion anymore. They were prisoners. They created a whisper network through the vents and cracks between rooms, building a map of the compound through fragmented details. Natalie learned that the building had 3 floors and at least 12 rooms. Some rooms had no windows. Some had 2-way mirrors. The women would knock softly at set times. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, as a check-in. Notes began to appear beneath her tray again, always passed during cleaning exchanges. Most were scribbled on tissue or food wrapping, guard rotates at 3 a.m. Lila moved. Be careful of the nurse. Natalie became the archivist, memorizing every detail, every movement. But she was also watched more closely than before. The camera in her room had been repositioned. When she looked up, the blinking red light stared back, unblinking. Then came the proposition. One night, a different man entered, younger than Majid, lean, unsmiling. He didn't give a name. He sat in the chair without invitation and said, "There's a way out. But you'll have to give us something." Natalie didn't answer. He leaned in. A statement. Video. You say you were safe. Say this place is legitimate. We record it, and you go free. She stared at him. And the others? He tilted his head. You want to save yourself, or save strangers? It wasn't a question. It was a test. And she knew then that others had likely made the same deal. Maybe that's where cider had come from. Maybe that's why some of the rooms went silent. She didn't give an answer that night. But her mind spun. If she played along, could she reach someone outside? Could she smuggle a message through the video? But if she refused, how many more days until she broke, until the walls themselves turned into her cage? The next morning, the food was warmer, and the air smelled of jasmine. A gift. A lure. That same afternoon, she caught a glimpse of another prisoner through a half-open door during a brief hallway transfer. A girl no older than 20, lips swollen, eyes dull. Natalie whispered her name later through the vent. Mona. came the whisper back. Egypt. For months. Natalie pressed her forehead to the wall. You don't deserve this, she whispered. Mona answered, no one does. That night, Natalie made her decision. If she was going to survive, it wouldn't be by pretending. It would be by playing their game better than they expected. She began speaking to the camera directly. At first, casual, I'd like books on psychology. Then, more pointed, I'm ready to talk. The next day, Majid returned. His smile was different now, measured, cautious. She asked for lipstick, a scarf, makeup. He raised an eyebrow. To look presentable, she said. If I'm making a video, I should look my best. That was her first win. They brought her everything. But what they didn't realize was that she had hidden her own message. Inside the lining of her scarf, she had stitched a piece of the napkin note that read, "Don't trust." It was a long shot, but if someone reviewed the footage closely, they might catch it. She blinked twice slowly at the camera during the video. A subtle signal. A code. But it wasn't over. That night, her access to the vent was sealed shut. The camera light turned green instead of red. And the next tray came with no note. Silence returned, not the kind that heals, but the kind that eats. Natalie lay awake for hours, heart pounding, unsure if she'd made the right move. Then, just before dawn, 3 knocks came from the far side of her wall. 3. Pause. 2. Amina. Still alive. Still trying. Natalie's hand pressed flat against the wall. She whispered, "Hold on." And from the other side, a whisper returned, "Now you lead." The air in the compound changed on what Natalie believed was the 18th day. It wasn't colder or warmer, just charged, like static before lightning. There were fewer guards in the hallways, and the usually punctual tray delivery came late. Something was shifting, and not in her favor. At first, she thought it meant an opportunity. Perhaps the video had worked, perhaps someone had picked up her signal. But her gut knew better. The calm that followed cruelty always felt the most dangerous. That morning, when a woman entered to take her for a brief wellness check, Natalie sensed it was a test. She was led not to the sterile bathroom she was used to, but to a lavish chamber she'd never seen before, lined with gold accents, plush pillows, and a chandelier that threw sharp angles of light across the floor. In the center, seated on a cushioned bench, was Saida. Natalie's breath caught in her throat. Saida smiled as if nothing had changed. No tension, no guilt, just that same perfectly controlled hospitality mask she had worn the day Natalie landed in Riyadh. "You look well," Saida said. "They've taken care of you." Natalie didn't reply. Her brain was still trying to reconcile the math. She hadn't seen Saida in weeks. She'd assumed Saida was part of the staff, maybe even a low-level pawn. But now it was clear, Saida wasn't a coordinator. She was an orchestrator. "Why?" Natalie asked, her voice dry. Saida tilted her head. "Why is a question for the beginning. You're in the middle now." That moment detonated something in Natalie, not just fury, but clarity. Saida had selected her from the beginning. She had been studying Natalie's reactions, calculating her responses, tailoring her captivity based on data only she possessed. "You chose me," Natalie said. "Back in the hotel. You were watching me." Saida smiled without blinking. "We choose many. You were simply promising." The room spun. Natalie realized that the retreat itself was likely a funnel, a soft net designed to lure women who fit a specific mold, alone, unattached, mentally vulnerable but physically strong, able to be shaped and repackaged. The purpose wasn't just containment. It was transformation. The women weren't being held as prisoners. They were being broken into assets. Saida slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, not just of Natalie, but of others. Amina, Sarah, Lila, even Mona. Each photo accompanied by a sheet of notes, medical histories, travel logs, language fluency, psychological profiles. Some pages were marked with red stamps, moved, retained, released. Only one had deceased. It was Katia. Natalie recoiled. "What is this?" she demanded. Saida's face didn't change. "This is the reality," she said. "You can leave, if you like. Others have. But they don't go back to who they were. We offer something new." Natalie shook her head. "You offer slavery." Saida's smile faded for the first time. "No," she said. "We offer rebirth." That night, Natalie couldn't sleep. She curled in a corner of her room, arms wrapped around her knees, the images of those dossiers playing in her head. Katia was dead. Others had been sent somewhere else. Traded. Sold. Recruited. It wasn't just a trafficking ring. It was a system, one that operated in shadows, backed by money, influence, and cultural silence. She now understood the green light on her camera, the videos, the subtle grooming. The compound wasn't a prison. It was a pipeline. But the worst part wasn't Saida's betrayal. It was discovering someone else had known, someone Natalie had trusted. Amina. The next day, Natalie tapped out their secret knock on the shared wall. 3, pause, 2. No reply. She tried again. Silence. Then, finally, a reply, one long tap. It wasn't the code. It wasn't even a response. It was a warning. Later that afternoon, she was escorted to a different room for what Majid called a personal debrief. The air smelled of clove and citrus. Majid poured tea and handed her a soft cloth to wipe her hands. "You've made an impression," he said. "There are those who see your potential." He didn't name them. He didn't have to. "What happens to the others?" Natalie asked. He stirred his tea slowly. "That depends on them," he said. "Some adapt. Some vanish." Then he leaned in. "One helped us find you." The words sank like lead. "Who?" she asked, though she already knew. Majid didn't answer. He just smiled, thin and sharp, and left the room. The woman who escorted her back was veiled, but when Natalie looked closely at her eyes, she recognized the shape, the hesitation. It was Amina. Their eyes locked for 1 second too long. It told Natalie everything. Amina had spoken. Whether willingly or under duress didn't matter, the result was the same. Natalie had been flagged. Her wall vent had been sealed. Her room repainted. It hadn't been a glitch. It had been a containment. Betrayal. Back in her room, Natalie collapsed onto the bed and screamed into the pillow. Not because of the betrayal, but because of what it meant. The network was crumbling. The women were being isolated. Whatever hope they had was vanishing. That night, for the first time, Natalie wrote on the underside of her tray. Not a plea. Not a message. A plan. 3 words. Tomorrow. Window. Distraction. She slid the tray back without looking up at the camera. Either someone would see it, or she'd be gone by then. The morning of the escape was disarmingly quiet. The kind of silence that didn't bring comfort but tightened around the lungs like wire. Natalie woke before the tray came, sat fully clothed on the edge of the bed, and waited. She had no idea if her message had been seen. There was no way to confirm if anyone would be at the window, or if the plan would collapse before it even began. But doing nothing meant eventual disappearance, like Katia. Like the other girls whose names were only whispers through vents. So she waited, not for a sign, but for the sound she'd memorized over the past 3 weeks, the mechanical hum of the lock at precisely 7:03. When it buzzed, she stood. The same woman as yesterday delivered the tray. She didn't speak, didn't look up. But there was something different in her pace. She lingered for 1 second longer than usual. Her pinky brushed the edge of the table twice before leaving. It wasn't random. It was code. The plan was live. Natalie inhaled slowly, forced her hands to stop shaking. She moved to the window. It was still barred, still too high to reach, but she knew that below it, 2 floors down, was a narrow courtyard lined with service crates. The timing had to be perfect. At exactly 7:17, the call to prayer would begin, drowning out noise for approximately 90 seconds. During that time, a guard shift change occurred near the south entrance, leaving the east hallway temporarily unwatched. She had watched, mapped, practiced every second of it in her mind like choreography. She took the bedsheet, twisted it tightly, and tied it to the leg of the wooden bench. She wasn't escaping through the window. She was staging a collapse. At 7:16, she kicked the bench violently toward the wall, yanking the sheet tight and letting herself fall with it. It produced a loud, splintering crack that echoed through the room. She then shoved herself against the corner, screamed as if injured, and waited. The camera was blocked by the shadow of the tipped-over furniture, just as she'd planned. 30 seconds passed. Then footsteps. Then shouting. The door slammed open. 2 men entered. One checked her pulse, the other radioed for assistance. In the chaos, no one noticed the third woman stepping into the hallway behind them. It was Mona. And she was running. The distraction worked. Natalie was pulled to her feet, dragged into the hallway, and restrained. She didn't resist. Her job was done. She only prayed that Mona made it to the generator room, the place they'd agreed on. The women had discovered during whispered conversations that the East Corridor camera was connected to a secondary generator hidden behind the courtyard fence. If Mona could cut the power, even briefly, it would create a blind spot. Enough to let one person get out. Maybe 2. As Natalie was shoved into a holding room with a flickering light, she counted. 1, 2, 3. Then darkness. A scream rang out down the hall. Not hers. Not Mona's. It was chaos. Doors slammed. The compound erupted into panic. For the first time since her arrival, Natalie smiled. 2 hours later, the power returned. She was relocated to a reinforced room. No vents. No windows. Just stone. She spent the next 2 days in silence. No questions. No food trays. No sound. Just stone and waiting. On the 21st day, the door opened. Cider entered, dressed differently, more formal, less polished. Her eyes had dark circles beneath them. Her voice was hoarse. "You're leaving," she said. Natalie didn't move. "Why?" she asked. Cider didn't answer. She only handed her a folded document and a sealed envelope. Inside the document was a flight itinerary, Riyadh to Paris, connecting to Seattle. The envelope had her passport. Her original one. Not a forgery. At the airport, she was escorted by 2 silent men. No cuffs, no threats. Just silence. She boarded without speaking, took her seat near the window, and didn't breathe until the plane was in the air. Even then, her hands trembled the entire flight. In Paris, she barely registered the terminal as she crossed into the transit zone. When she reached Seattle, she was met by U.S. Customs. Questions were asked. She lied. Said she'd gotten lost, had her documents stolen, was helped by locals. They didn't believe her, but they stamped her arrival and let her through. She wasn't ready to tell the truth. Not yet. The news broke 2 weeks later. An anonymous whistleblower had sent footage to a major international human rights organization. The video, heavily pixelated, showed parts of the compound, glimpses of rooms, and evidence of women held against their will. But it didn't show faces. It didn't mention names. No arrests were made. No embassy statements. Just a rising murmur online, then silence. The internet has a short memory. But Natalie didn't forget. She gave one interview. CNN. She told part of the truth, the travel, the disappearance, the confinement. She described being held in a private facility in the outskirts of Riyadh, but didn't name it. Didn't mention the other women. When asked why she'd stayed silent, she simply said, "Not everyone got out." The anchor leaned in, asked the final question, "What do you want now?" Natalie paused. Her answer was simple. Justice. But what she didn't say was that she'd made a promise, to Mona. To come back. To not let this be the end. And in the drawer of her bedside table, beside the passport and her last journal entry, sat a phone she hadn't told anyone about. Burned. Untraceable. Waiting. For a message that had just arrived. One word. Ready.